Good morning. We welcome everyone to the Wednesday, March the 27th meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. Let's begin and invite you to stand and joining me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin with our Safety First Minute, and Sheldon Shaw.
Chair, Trustees, appreciate the opportunity. Again, Sheldon, I'm the Safety Manager here for UTA. And for my Safety Minute, I want to highlight a safety partner we have, and that's the Utah Safety Council. If you're unfamiliar with the Utah Safety Council, they're on 1700 South, not quite as far west as Redwood Road. And we partner with them on a lot of safety fairs and a lot of things that happen in the community. Because we're a member, we get, usually a member of UTA can take any of their classes for free. We have 6 CPR instructors who have all been certified through the Utah Safety Council. And because of that, we've certified hundreds of our fellow employees in CPR, AED, and first aid. And so I think it's important that we recognize our safety partners. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sheldon. We'll next go to public comment and turn to Bob.
We do not have any public comment at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next will be entertain a motion for approval of our minutes from the March 20th board meeting.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of the March 20th, 2019 board meeting.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll next go to our agency report with Steve Meyer. Steve.
Good morning, Chair. 2 items for you this morning. That working? See if I have control. That would be a key.
Left side.
Got it. Great. Wanted to just give you an update on the Sharp-Tinnick connection. So this is some rail work we're doing in Utah County, and this is a partnership with UDOT and some of the communities there, Spanish Fork and Springville. The previous board in November or so took action on this, but we want to give you an update on where we're at right now. We own a portion of the Sharp, and we own this was back in the 2002 purchase from Union Pacific Railroad. We acquired some of that corridor, and then we own the Tintic in total. We've always known that in a portion of this shows you towards the North Provo Station where our existing terminus, and then coming south. And this, the Tintic line is to the east and the Sharp line to the west, and you see that little area in red down there. That's a connection that needs to be made between the Sharp and Tintic. And you'll see some red dots there on the Tintic are some existing at-grade crossings, and there's some of those that are in need of improvements, and some on the Sharp as well. So this is zoomed in into that box area. So with this connection, if we make this connection now, we eliminate 5 at-grade crossings in Springville and Spanish Fork. And that's a benefit to those communities. Some of those haven't been upgraded yet, and there was a significant cost to the communities to do that. They would rather spend those dollars building this connection and eliminating those crossings. We anticipate in that section of the Tintic, a small portion of it north of the Spanish Fork connection there, point, that southern connection point, we would need to preserve some track for UP to make some freight moves. But north of that, near where number 5 is north, we could potentially use that as a rail trail, convert that site, remove the rail, and use it for other purposes. We don't see a need that UTA would need that line currently, and in the immediate to long or midterm future. So we've been working with those communities to get that going. Springville was awarded a $5.15 million grant, some federal funds through UDOT. UTA will actually manage this project at Springsville's request. We have more expertise and working relationship with Union Pacific. We had signed a federal aid agreement in October, approved by the board, and we've agreed to local matches. We're finalizing those agreements now. UTA's match is $107,000 in-kind services, where our staff will help perform the environmental document and manage the project. So no hard dollars coming out of this, but it's a real advantage for us with the future of Frontrunner. We'll talk later today about, and sets us up for that. It also gets this connection built before that area develops, and we don't have to pay increased land values for that. So very much advantageous to UTA to do that. The other item I had is we should recognize Sheldon Shaw a little bit. The Operation Lifesaver had their annual meeting here recently, and Sheldon got the silver medal. He got second place within Operation Lifesaver for the number of safety presentations he's made to schools and other entities. And that's certainly a very important part of what Operation Lifesaver does. And UTA has been a strong supporter, and many of our employees participate in giving those safety training sessions. So congratulations to Sheldon for his good work. He's working towards the gold for next year. He's gonna, I don't know, I don't want him injuring the number one person who did that, but he's done a great job, and it's great that he finds the time outside of his normal UTA time to make presentations to students and other interested groups interested in train safety. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say Sheldon was humble, because yesterday I ran into him during the course of the day, and he was telling me about the dinner, but he didn't tell me he'd gotten an award. So we are grateful for your service, Sheldon. Can I ask one question on? I don't know if you want to go back, but so is the alignment that is most likely to become the front runner alignment then becomes that southern half of the Tintic corridor?
That's correct. So coming from the north, from Provo, we're in that sharp alignment.
Okay.
And at the top of the screen there is actually a rail yard where they do some coal handling. We have to shift from the west side of the track to the east side of the track. So there'd be a flyover structure similar to what we have in part of Salt Lake County. Yeah. And then as you come through here, we'd make that connection. UP would continue to run on the sharp. They would continue to have access to the Tintic, but the Tintic is the alignment then that we own that would take us down to Payson.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just had a question on that as well. Thanks, Steve, for the clarification. So when we talk about the anything, if we end up, so hopefully we can get that completed and done. And after that happens, just to clarify, you're talking about the fact that where the current grade crossings are indicated by the dots, those 5, that everything north of the connection, just above Spanish Fork and beyond, that's going to be a rail trail? Is that decided, or is that it's one of the options?
It's one of the options. The communities are discussing that, how that fits in with their trail master plan, but it is an option that becomes viable at that point because that's no longer needed for freight service.
And that's so the communities are through MAG as well are all in that decision-making process?
Yes.
Just to clarify. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, Steve, go back one more slide, the larger picture of so down in this lower right-hand side, where those 5 red dots are, all of that Tintic then all the way back up to Provo Station would be eliminated?
No, just up to that junction where those other 2 lines break off from that. Okay. So you see the 3 come together. Okay. There actually is another study going on to consolidate those 2. Those then go up Spanish Fork Canyon.
All right.
And there's some thought and some real need and some significant benefits to consolidate those 2 for some of the east-west roads and some future flyovers that need to be done over the rail corridor to allow them to get back down to grade by US 89.
But the northern part of that Tintic then would still be an active railway.
Correct.
It would just be that area with the 5 crossings that would be eliminated.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that update. We'll next go to a consideration of a resolution designating transit-oriented development sites, and we have Paul Drake before us, and then we'll have some discussion, and Kevin as well. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and trustees. Thank you for your time. I think you're well aware of why we're here today, but just for the sake of kind of reviewing where we've been briefly. Recently, we've updated our TOD policy with the Board of Trustees and the Local Advisory Board. That established a process to prepare and prioritize TOD efforts in collaboration with our regional and local partners. The program calls for an extensive planning efforts with local municipalities for areas around transit hubs. And many of those station area plans have been reviewed by the Local Advisory Board and this body. We discussed selecting additional TOD sites. As you know, the statute allows UTA to partner on 8 projects. We have 5 active, and there are 3 additional that remain. Last week, we discussed how the board could potentially prioritize those remaining sites, and today we have the opportunity to select those. Kevin and I are here to answer any questions if needed prior to the selection. This slide shows the results of what we call the system analysis tool. It looks at sites, prioritizes them a few different ways. Overall TOD score based on the metrics that we've discussed prior, growth opportunity, sites that prioritize areas that need a catalytic project, and then affordable housing need and the ranking there. Any questions for us?
Yes, Paul, just a clarification that you and I have discussed. On the growth opportunity, there was evidently a filter in that particular selection that eliminated Salt Lake Central. Is that correct? That's the reason why Salt Lake Central is not listed there under growth opportunity?
What the filter does is it basically eliminates the more urbanized sites.
Okay.
So there are criteria, and there is a score for Salt Lake Central. There's a score for some of the other urbanized sites, but the focus of the growth opportunity is to capture those that are less urbanized, and therefore the sake of or for the filter.
If I remember our discussion correctly, without that filter, Salt Lake would have been listed number 1 under growth opportunity. Is that correct?
That's correct. It scores so high on basically any of the metrics that it would be number 1 there as well.
So that was the real reason why it doesn't show up, that in the other urbanized areas.
Again, it just goes back to the purpose of that particular lens.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, what when we're looking at the overall, is it sort of is it an aggregate? I mean, do you aggregate the score and then somehow average it out? How do you get to the overall score?
Do you want to take that, Kid?
So the overall is not an aggregate of like the growth opportunity or affordable. Yeah. Each of these scores are kind of independent of each other. They're just using different kind of weightings for those variables of municipal support, market strength, things like that. So with the overall, it just has that. I think it was 1/3 split from like municipal support, accessibility and market strength, and then that's how it's doing it. So it's trying to balance all those different needs. But yeah, so it's not an aggregate of the other scores.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Paul, or are you looking, I mean, did you have anything else in your presentation? Or?
Oh, I didn't know. If you have any other questions, we're happy to, or add to the discussion if you'd like.
Okay. Let me turn to my colleagues to see if you have questions or thoughts.
I do have one question. Were all of our areas of TOD potentially were included in all of these analyses? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Even if they are not at a preparation level that could actually be something that could be developed right away. Is that so? We just took it for everything and applied it, and based on the criteria, scored it accordingly. Is that correct?
That's correct. Our system analysis tool looks at all of our sites, including those where UTA doesn't own property. That goes to the overall purpose of that tool. There is another filter for this particular exercise where we filtered it just where UTA does own property. Yeah, these reflect the scores of all places where UTA owns property.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
I just wanted to add that this system analysis tool, a lot of our regional partners were a big part in moving this effort forward. And so hopefully they'll be able to find these things useful. Without that land filter, they can also see sites where TOD would be effective in general and not just at places where UTA owns land.
Okay, good. I was just going to, and I said this last week, so I apologize for being a little bit of a broken record. While we only can choose 3 sites, it doesn't preclude other sites where there are other landowners from moving forward, and a community that has adopted a plan and going forward. It really, our selection really speaks to our participation of our own land in somebody else's project, really. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
We don't have any control over other private holdings and surrounding lands that outside of our own land.
We don't. That's correct. And I think that's the strength of the board's new TOD policy is that it looks beyond UTA's controlled property and identifies just things that the city and the other stakeholders can do, the other landowners within that area to promote transit-oriented districts as opposed to just single projects.
And if a site were not chosen, then and the community move forward knowing that there's a little bit of a hole around our rail stop or station, it probably only enhances their ratings down the road if other things start to develop. Anyway, I mean, it's not like it's a detrimental blow to them going forward.
No, absolutely. And I think that UTA and our staff would support cities, especially those who have done station area plans. Each of those plans have a list of strategic recommendations that would help to encourage that kind of development. And we'll continue to work with cities to implement those recommendations. And yeah, definitely it would make it more viable in the future as things become opportunities come our way to implement those plans.
And I think it's probably fair, and I wouldn't sense from my colleagues any unwillingness to approach with other communities, the legislature, and ask for a lifting so that our own parcels could be part of their plans in the future. So anyway, other questions or comments, or otherwise I'd entertain motions. So.
I wanted to make a comment, and then I can go
Please.
for a motion. I really feel like that this is a great opportunity to approach those other communities that are in various stages of looking at how their TOD could be implemented in some fashion. And anecdotally, we've seen a lot of development along the tracks line on 4 South that is completely not related to UTA in the sense that we had absolutely no decision-making or anything else involved in that. But you're seeing that communities and developers are both recognizing the value of being able to say, look, this is a transit opportunity of some fashion. That one happens to be a tracks line, but there's also other opportunities as well, certainly with the BRTs and Front Runner itself. And so I just wanted to comment on the fact that dovetailing on what Carrollton has indicated in terms of working with those communities. They do have a lot of opportunity with the land that's owned by others, developers and whatnot, and to kind of get to that point of being able to master utilize the TOD site. So I wanted to thank you for your work, both Paula and Kevin and all of the team. I know that this has been a lot of lift, and I know that we've had a lot of stakeholder partners be very engaged in this, and so thank you guys for that. And with that, I'd like to make a motion that we that we adopt R 2019-03-05, designating transit-oriented development sites, and we want to designate them by the overall listing that was on the previous slide. Sorry about that. Do you want me to mention? I'm thinking we should mention them.
Yeah, we should mention them.
So from the system analysis results, the overall listing for the 3 sites that we currently have available is number 1, Salt Lake Central / North Temple Station, number 2, Ogden Central, and number 3, Clearfield Station.
I second that motion.
I have a motion and a second discussion to the motion. I would just say, again, we're grateful that communities are working with us and working through these stationary plans. I think back, I'm a history major, so I love to reminisce a little bit, but when I first took office in '98, none of the gateway existed, really. I mean, there was some rail lines that went clear over to, including on 4th West, and as you watch, a lot of money invested, both privately and publicly, and including UTA in that area, and watching that continue to evolve. It's been fun. You don't very often in public life get to watch a skyline change as you drive down the freeway. And what's exciting for me to see, what was then fairly sort of new and novel opportunity when the north-south line was first constructed, but you see all these other opportunities throughout our community and the necessity to go forward with things. And so I'm excited that all these communities likewise will have similar opportunities, and it's not, if you look at Salt Lake City as a whole, it's just a fraction of percentage of their land, yet it has an enormous opportunity of, housing and office and other opportunities. And so as these other sites develop in these other communities, it's far from a majority, but it's a key use of our infrastructure that the public's invested in. And so I'm just excited as we go forward. So thank you.
I might also comment. I look forward to a time when we're able to lift the cap on the total number of projects, and would hope that the move that we're making now will enable those who have the opportunity to lift that cap, that they will actually lift the cap and allow these other cities to move forward with their developments in a way that benefits not only the cities but our transit opportunity.
I would echo what both the other trustees said in terms of the cap. I feel like that would be a really valuable tool for all of our communities moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We have a motion and a second, and we'll turn to for a roll call vote.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Trustee Millington?
Aye.
Chair Christensen?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Well, thank you to you and your staff.
Thank you.
And for those that have participated in the process, we look forward to continuing to work with them. So.
Absolutely. We appreciate all their efforts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're next, item 8 on our agenda, which is contracts and disbursements. And our first item up is the one in regards to a contract for the Depot District Hazardous Materials Management with Wasatch Environmental. Eddie?
Thank you, Chair, trustees. I have two environmental contracts for you today. One is with Wasatch Environmental, that's for hazardous waste. Another is for SWCA Consulting for cultural resources. We've chosen these two consulting companies to be available during Depot District demolition and construction work. Each consultant will be on an as-needed basis and have an hourly rate, and then we'll set a ceiling of not to exceed. This first one that we have is for Wasatch Environmental. It's for hazardous waste materials remediation. The scope will include oversight and monitoring of abatement activities, correspondence with the Department of Environmental Quality, soil and groundwater sampling, removal and disposal of contaminated soil and groundwater, and provides assistance with required federal and state permits. Total contract is $300,000. Any questions on this one?
Any questions from the board?
Just a quick question, just to clarify. So the determination of the 300,000 came with the whole entire scope, and that's what was estimated. Is that an internal estimate or an external estimate?
Or is that from experience?
Yeah,
Exactly.
one of
We have to, when you have a contract, you have to do an independent cost estimate with your requisition, and so it's internal based on our previous experience.
And as Eddie mentioned, this is a not to exceed. So as we find issues or there's points during the process of demolition or construction where testing needs to be done, if they find some discolored soil or potential areas of concern, then they are on call, and we don't have to go through any type of procurement that's already set up for this consultant to come in and do the testing work. So it speeds up the process, reduces delays for the contractor, and making sure we're identifying any problems as quickly as possible.
Other questions on that one? Maybe, if not, Eddie, let me turn to a motion on this particular contract.
I make a motion that we approve this contract for the Depot District Hazardous Waste Materials Management with Wasatch Environmental, not to exceed $300,000.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll go to a roll call.
Trustee Millington?
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Chair Christensen?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks. Next contract.
Sir. The next contract is for cultural resource consultation with SWCA. SWCA Consulting has been chosen as a cultural consultant and will oversee any unforeseen historical artifact discoveries and mitigation. SWCA is very familiar with the site and had documented previous discoveries from the construction of our CNG facility when we built that a few years ago. The scope of this contract would include an updated treatment plan, amending the memorandum of agreement. That would include the SHPO with Salt Lake City and Preservation, Utah, training construction workers and documentation with the State Historical Preservation Office. Again, this is a not to exceed contract amount of $200,000.
Any questions on this particular one?
You mentioned that there were some cultural relics or something discovered previously. What was the nature of those?
Yeah, so when we were building the fuel and fare building, we encountered a buried power plant that Denver and Rio Grande had south of 400 South. So that was very exciting. And also when we did the, when we were doing the fiber optic trench, we went through the roundhouse, remnants of the roundhouse.
Interesting.
What remediation was required as a result of discovering these things that have been long since buried?
Well, you have to do a treatment plan. So you have a memorandum of agreement with the SHPO for our site because it's over 100 years old to begin with. And then when you have a discovery like that, you have a treatment plan that says what you're going to do, and then you have to monitor as you uncover the things that you're discovering, and you have to document. And then in our memorandum of agreement, we also had stipulations that we had to meet, And one of those was a report. We had to, they required us to have a report. And then we also had to write an article for Architectural Digest. So for that discovery. And we also had to do
At least you got a publication out of it.
Yeah.
Look on the bright side.
We also have 2 displays over at the plaza at Central Station that are related to this project. If you haven't seen those, I can take you over there.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes forget all the activity that took place in this site in its early years. So, any other questions? If there are none, I'd entertain a motion on this contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval for the Depot District Hazardous Materials Management with SWCA.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. We'll roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Then looks like we have a change order to consider.
Right. So this is my third and final contract of the day. This is for Tiger Phase 2 Amendment 6. This is for Summit County Bike Share, and it's with Granite Construction. This is part of our Tiger program. This change order is for the construction portion of the Summit County Bike Share project. Total change order is $682,904. And that would bring this total contract amount to $25,191,479, and that includes all 94 projects that are in Tiger. This budget in particular covers the construction cost of installing bike share docking stations at 11 locations in Summit County.
Eddie, who pays for the $682,000? Is that the federal grant? Is it local money?
So it's both. So it's a portion of obviously federal grant is the big part of it, and then Summit County is coming in with the local match. So there's no UTA dollars associated with this particular.
How much is the local match?
$172,087.
So about a sixth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so does the change order is necessitated? Does that come because there was some underestimating, or that comes as a result of the final bid by the contractor on this project? How do you get to a change order, I guess?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Turn on your mic.
I have to ask you to turn on your mic. And please introduce yourself.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, Heather Betting, project manager for Tiger. So the way this contract is set up is it's a CMGC contract with Granite Construction. So the initial contract was actually for about $300,000, and that was to cover the pre-construction services for all of the 94 projects. And then each time we have a project ready for construction, it's a change order or an amendment to that agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is actually the 6th amendment, and then the 25 million will be, it won't be 94, it won't be 94 amendments, but there'll be more than 6 to get to that. So we're actually about, we're at about 6 million with this one. Yeah, so the next amendments, they'll vary based on the project cost. So some of them are grouped together by municipality. This one is just Summit County. So.
Okay. If there are no other questions,
just a clarification, if I may. You mentioned that of the 25 million, about 6 million has been committed.
Yes, after this amendment goes through. So
okay.
The 25 million mentioned here is the anticipated total of the
contract. For all 94
For all 94 projects, yeah.
So about a quarter of it has been allocated, something like that.
Yes.
How many projects of the 94?
So we did, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 13.
13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and
So
Right
we'll be
now we
back
have-
here
We'll be back many times.
many times as we
Yeah.
spend that 25 million.
Yeah, exactly. And it's through 2021. So
Okay.
this is going to be over a few more years. So
All right, thank you for that clarification.
yeah, no problem.
And just to clarify, so the overall contract has already been awarded and granted to Granite Construction, and then
Yes.
they're just doing the oversight and management of these various projects. Is that correct?
Yes, they're managing and constructing each of them. Yeah. So the initial contract for 300,000, there's a small budget for each project for them to do the pre-construction services for each of those projects. So they'll draw down on that over the 4 years, and then each time we have a project that's ready for construction, they give us a price, we negotiate that price, and then we create this phase 2 contract amendment. And then once this is approved, they'll have notice to proceed on that project. So.
If there are no other questions, I'll entertain a motion on this.
I move that we approve this change order for the Tiger Phase 2 Amendment 6, the Summit County Bike Share for Granite Construction.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington?
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Chair Christensen?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're next to our discussion items section, and pleased to have back part 3 of Future Frontrunner. And I know we have, in addition to Steve Meyer, Ted Knowlton and Sean Sager from Ted is from Wasatch Front Regional Council, and Sean is from Mountain Lands Association of Governments, and both are good partners to UTA. So thank you for being here today.
Yes, Chair, appreciative to have the big guns here. This is the power behind our long-range transportation plans. And, certainly Future Frontrunner figures prominently in that plan. So if we've talked the previous 2 times we've been with you talking about the Future Frontrunner, we've talked about the Wasatch Central Corridor Plan and kind of just to help describe the purpose and need for improving Frontrunner service, continuing on to make improvements to that system. And then last time we talked about the Future Frontrunner study itself, the study that we had commissioned, and some of the findings out of that study. So I wanted to share with you today and give you that perspective of then as these 2 entities have looked at the long-range transportation plans, where they have seen and prioritized Frontrunner improvements in there, and what we can see moving out in the future. So I think we'll start with Wasatch Front, start with Ted. Thanks.
Just have to push.
Yep,
there
pardon
we
me.
go.
Thank you.
And then it stays on.
Great to be with you today, trustees. And I'll just note up front, going into this, that when we talk about our plans, we do this in collaboration with UTA staff, with each other, under the framework of the collaboration of Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. So we're in lockstep in terms of the assumptions that we make together. I'm going to briefly go through these 4 points, an overview of our planning process very briefly, just get into what and how we do phasing, and then focus on details of Frontrunners phasing. And so that's what I'll do, and then turn it to my colleague, Sean Seeger. Very briefly, WFRC and MAG conduct our transportation plan in concert with understanding local government's visions for land use and economic development. We call that Wasatch Choice 2050. Of course, the Regional Transportation Plan is, as you already know, the place where transportation investments are born. It's a collaborative process, and I already talked about that. It hits every key mode: roads, transit, bike lanes, and trails. We update it every 4 years. It's based on a rigorous process that includes travel demand modeling, understanding financial constraints, which we're going to dig into, and of course, understanding air quality conformity. We're on slightly different schedules, but we are aimed, we have planned adoption of this regional transportation plan just in May. So we're in the 2-minute warning has sounded on this planning process.
Let me ask this question.
Yes, please.
Are there any other cities, areas in the country that have this kind of a unified plan you're aware of?
Not at a statewide level that we are aware of. We still believe that we are unique in it. And, you know, we're always trying to improve that level of collaboration. So we think it's actually quite special.
Okay, I wanted to make the point that this is something that's really quite unique in the United States, this unified plan that has been brought together over the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely in agreement, Trustee Millington.
Yeah, if I could add real briefly, Trustee, that in many states, the MPOs are in competition with each other or with competition with the state DOT, or they're battling the transit authority. That is not a problem we have in the state of Utah. That's our secret sauce, if you will, that we've enjoyed, our fry sauce that we've enjoyed through the years, is we like to work together. It's kind of very unique when you talk to our partners outside of the state of Utah. You know, they're battling and fighting each other over different tax schemes or different projects, and we find a lot of pleasure in working with each other.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, and we just recently got back from the APTA conference, and I heard that in a couple different places, and so you know, we do appreciate the fact that you do serve fry sauce. So.
I am never going to think of fry sauce in the same way. I'm just not. That's such a good analogy.
So we're going to talk about phases, and very generally, phase 1 is through the year 2030. Phase 2 in the 30 to 40. Phase 3, 40 to 50. When we talk about unfunded or vision projects, generally we mean after that time frame. It's a slight difference in the phasing process between us, but the major bases I think are pretty similar, which are that we score projects with analytics, in our case, to understand how they compare against a variety of things, including air quality and fit with local government visions. That includes an air quality look, and that is a process that is not done, again, in silo. It's done in collaboration with our transportation partners. Here are some of the key transit revenue sources that we assume. And so when we look out into the future, we talk about this together, and we make good faith planning level assumptions about new sources of revenue that we think it's a reasonable assumption they will come on over time. We're not trying to be conservative or liberal. We're just trying to do it's an uncertain thing to do, but these are the assumptions we make. So certainly the TTIF growth, we have a conservative level of assumption on that. We do account for an assumption for future local option sales taxes or equivalent. We'll touch base on that briefly if you're interested. We forecast fares, some competitive federal grants, and the like. And so that gives you just a general sense of that. If you're interested in drilling down, we can certainly do that. Or I should say, Sean is available to do that. Now, what you're looking at here is an analysis of if we build things as we believe they are needed, and we start to operate and maintain at that time, blue bars, how does that expense compare with that anticipated future revenue? Now, within this, embedded in this, the first phase includes double tracking Frontrunner across the current span. And the second phase, again, which we believe is needed, is electrification. Now, so that's a need-based analysis, not a financial constraint. And you can see the big gap between blue, need, and red, revenue. And so we then push back projects so that the blue bars fit within the red bars. And the net effect of that is that double tracking moves to phase 2 in our plan, again, not the adopted plan, but the draft plan, and electrification moves past the end of phase 3. So that's the way this works when we just simply look at the financial constraints that we have available to us. If it's helpful, I can also, well, maybe I'll just hold on drilling down and we'll just keep going for that. Now, you might find this interesting. I just have 2 more slides and then I'm going to hand it to my partner here. One is that if you look at the UTA program of that future investment in the plan, commuter rail capital accounts for 13%. We found this pretty fascinating, that the blue sliver is operating because commuter rail can be very efficient in operating and maintenance. And I think that that's part of the thing that we ought to keep in mind with regard to front runner service. Sean?
Thank you, Ted. I'll move into Utah County's regional transportation plan, maybe, with our slide deck. There we go. Thank you, Steve. So real brief, I'm going to kind of skip some of these introductory slides because they're the same exact information that Ted just gave you about the regional transportation plan. So the MAG plan is a 2050 horizon, the same as WFRC. We coordinate as Ted described, and our staff are constantly working with each other. In fact, we were in your office yesterday. We had 3 or 4 of us at WFRC's new office, so it was great. Heard about phasing, a couple key projects in our transportation plan, our 2050 one that we look forward to adopting here in June. Public comment starts in May. For us, we're about 1 month behind WFRC. Is the Vineyard Frontrunner Station, which we're very excited about. A lot of activity this last legislative session. In fact, I was describing to Steve that we were in St. George on Thursday at the UDOT Commission meeting, which is their STIP workshop, and a lot of good discussions about using TTIF to make that project whole for the Vineyard Commuter Rail Station, the Frontrunner Station. So we think that that one's coming together nicely. And then the Frontrunner South, from Provo down to Payson, is that red line that you can see there. That's the other project that we have in our first phase of our plan, and we think we can fund both those projects. You can see the commuter rail south to Payson is a $216 million project. So South County is getting excited about investment in the South County. In Utah County, we have this dynamic of north versus south. In Salt Lake County, there's a dynamic of east versus west. And South County has long looked to North County and said, you guys need this heavy investment that's taken place in North County for the past 10, 15 years, but someday South County is going to need South County investment. And so there's kind of been this gentleman's agreement, you know, that when South County kind of needs a help from the north, that help is going to be there. So it's coming up soon, it seems like to us. Future of Frontrunner Study. Of course, this is the topic today. This was managed by UTA. I believe it was Carrie was managing the project, and worked closely with Carrie and her staff, her associates with our staff. It had 3 different recommendations. In that blue bar in 2030, we had a low investment scenario, adding double track to help with the reliability issues. We had a medium investment that looked at double track and 15-minute headways. And then we had a high investment, which allowed for electrification. And I'll go to this next slide and I'll show you real briefly that if we did the low investment, we could get more reliability and some time savings in there as well, but we could not get to 15-minute headways, which is what we would our goal is to try to get to 15-minute headways because, like Ted described, the efficiency of Frontrunner is huge. You have 1 or 2, what do you call them, conductors on that system versus a bus that has, you know, a driver for each bus, and so it's very efficient to run Frontrunner. But we could not achieve that with a low investment. When we look at the medium investment, it requires another purchase of diesel locomotives, which we did not want to do because we have aspiration to get to an electrified system. Electrification does a couple key things for you. It quicker starts, quicker stops, air quality benefit. And Steve, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn on any of these things, but those are some of what I'm remembering from the output of this. And so our goal is to get to electrification. So what Ted described in our constrained plan is we fund that low investment in phase 2, we skip the medium investment, and then we don't fund or we put out into vision that high investment, because we have always felt that it's our job as technical staff to give the mayors and county commissioners, our policymakers in the region, the information to show them what the need is and see if they can rise to that need or rise to that occasion. So we'll show them what the need is and then let the policymakers figure out if we can afford to do that in the future. So that's why we have these kind of aspirational components to our plan. Again, a similar slide to what Ted went through in terms of what our need is versus what we can actually afford to construct. And this is based off of the same stuff that Ted went through, federal funds, TTIF, state sales, or county local option sales tax. And I think that's all I had in terms of slides. Steve and I did talk about creating a little spreadsheet for the trustees to look at in terms of what we assume the local quarter-cent sales taxes will be in place through the year 2050. So you can see each county on this sheet that's associated with an MPO in the state of Utah. And this comes from our Lewis, Young, Roberts, and Birmingham model that we run that Ted described us all working together. We've hired a private municipal finance firm, Lewis, Young, to help us with that Excel spreadsheet is what it is basically. And it takes in all these assumptions and it grows it into the future based off of state projections. And we work on this spreadsheet for probably 18 months before we get to that point when we actually put these assumptions into our plan. And then UTA staff has a separate tool called the scenario building tool. Carrie has built this amazing tool that I hope you've heard about. And if you haven't, you need to ask your staff to receive a presentation on it, because we were so excited about the work that Carrie did with this tool that helps us run scenarios about what new service we could run. And so we'll tell Carrie, hey, we show good ridership on Front Runner in phase 1 down to Payson. Can we afford to do that? She puts it in her model. The model uses the Lewis Young data, and it creates a scenario where it describes whether you can afford it or not, phase by phase by phase. So it's very complex. And as part of that input is this assumption that you see on this sheet. So I remember Mike Allegra and previous administrations were really excited to try to get us to 1 full percentage of sales tax. And if we could just get 1 cent, we would be good. And that's what we're seeing now in this 2050 plan is we're at about 1% sales tax dedicated to transit along the Wasatch Front area. So kind of concludes my remarks.
Sean, obviously the legislatures will have had and will probably continue to have a robust discussion on sales tax, and that I assume the model sort of continues to hold true as long as however that restructuring takes place produces at or somewhat equivalent kinds of revenue sources, right?
Yeah, I heard that was one of the biggest pushbacks initially was don't touch the local quarter-cent sales taxes, because local governments, Summit County, Wasatch County, rural counties, urban counties have bonded against that revenue stream. Yeah. And so go ahead and experiment with the state side of the sales tax, the 4.1%. Let's see how that goes. And then if that goes good, let's consider expanding it to the local quarter-cent sales taxes. But obviously, the result of the end of the session, it was not put forward.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, I kind of wanted to ask you, since you discussed the financial partner of Lewis Young,
yeah.
Can you tell us what those parameters were for those growth expectations and population and other factors that really kind of drilled that down a little bit?
Yes, it's extensive. we look at every revenue source, not just on the transit side, but on the roadway side, from the state's perspective, from UDOT's perspective, as well as each local government throughout the state of Utah. And we take each one of those growth assumptions of any revenue that's going into transportation. It could be developer investment or approvals. Sometimes you have a developer that's required to expand a road, so we account for that. We use the LTAP Center at Utah State University to try to estimate the investment that's taking place by those local developers. We look at municipal utility fees, like are in place in Provo and Mapleton and Highland, where they're actually charging their citizens a utility fee for transportation to maintain their roads. So we look at not only the capacity, but the maintenance of the existing system as well. We use the Gardner Policy Institute for the population projections. We use the governor's Office of Planning and Budget numbers for sales tax increase through time. And we negotiate what we will assume in that plan based on what Ted described as kind of a agnostic approach. We're not conservative or aggressive on our projections. We try to say, what should we assume? And we're really concerned about the first 5 to 10 years. From that point forward, we are not as concerned because we know we update this plan every 4 years. So we only have to be right for 4 years, is what we tell ourselves. But we have to be thinking in a 25-year time frame, looking out. But Trustee, I have a sheet that I can give you that shows you each one of those revenue sources, what the 20-year look back is historically as what actually occurred, what we have assumed in the past, and what the delta is between those, and then what our new assumption is for this 2050 plan. It's a fascinating look, and I know that you'd probably enjoy going through that line item by line item. I think that there's some 40 different revenue sources that we track.
Wow, thank you.
How accurate were you?
In general, here's what we observe is that we're too conservative. Our numbers are too low,
Okay.
both in population and job growth as well as revenue growth. So if you look back, in fact, when we had our regional transportation plan open houses last summer, I brought around with me the 1965 transportation plan for Utah Valley. And it looked out 20 years to the year 1985. Build an interstate in Utah County, you know? And we're going to need to do...
You're right.
Yeah, they were right.
That's a good prediction.
Mm-hmm. And so if you look at what Commissioner Millington, Trustee Millington has asked me this question when he was with UDOT. How accurate were we in our projections? And when you look back, we were too conservative, meaning that we were too low in our projection of what we actually experienced by as much as 20%. So that's generally what we observe.
It's a big shift.
Yeah,
essentially.
it is.
Certainly in terms of population and the expectation of sales tax growth, which obviously is a major funding revenue source. So anyway, thank you.
One question I have, and maybe Steve, I don't know if you're talking about this, but maybe Kent was involved in the transportation, I'm going to call it the wrong thing, but the legislative committee that actually led up to the creation of the 3-member board. But sort of the gap shift, it was interesting this legislative session as we met with different parties. They're really anxious and can't figure out why we're not moving further ahead. But I look at your things there, and Bob's understandably conservative, wanting us to be fiscally responsible. But do they understand those gaps and the fact that they don't work in a 10-year gap or 10-year period under current scenarios?
If I understand your question right, Carlton, it's do our policymakers understand that we have more needs than we have revenue?
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and where the
yes.
if things stay as the status quo, where it's likely to come into play.
I think they do.
Time-wise.
That's a major message of the Unified Transportation Plan. When Ted described that we roll all these plans up and we show one number and then we show a gap. And the gap is we don't have enough money to build everything we need to build. A need in the transit arena is defined as good ridership, and ridership capable of attracting a federal investment. So would a Federal Transit Administration, match our money at 50-50 rate in a small starts or new starts grant? So that's how we qualify need. We can justify that based on ridership. And so we've dealt with policymakers through the years that, again, want to be told what the need is, not what they can afford to do. If we tell them what the need is, they may find out a way to rise to the occasion to build that need. And in fact, I think we saw some of that this year with this legislative session looking at transformational transit investment with Chris Cox's request of the Transit Authority. And so we're starting to see that, the policymakers want to be told what the need is, and then they'll figure out if they can afford it or not. So,
and if I could also comment on this, anecdotally, I think that there's not enough awareness of the fact that even as a number of these new revenue sources, these new quarters have been passed, that UTA rightfully is putting a lot of that revenue, when you have the flexibility to do so, towards debt. And so when you look at the revenue in our planning assumptions between the first phase and the second phase, it jumps up significantly. So I think that people may be overestimating the amount of revenue available for capital in the near term. And that's maybe where part of that gap of understanding is.
Steve, any other? Steve, or
yeah. So this has been a three-part discussion to try to get you, to inform you and kind of frame the issues, and then talk about, as we go forward, updating our strategic plans that they match up with the Wasatch Front's long-range plans, and we look at strategies for preparing for these projects. So as I look at this, I see a couple critical areas, right? I see the need for a certain level of additional design work in the corridor. It's going to give us a better feel for costs, a better feel for where we need additional right-of-way from third parties, whether it be UDOT, whether it be Union Pacific Railroad, whether it be private property owners along the corridor. And then that then would put us in a position where we could do some descriptions of that, and then if there's corridor preservation funds available within the state, you could be in a position to take advantage of that. And you look at how that would benefit us. Well, buying property sooner, lower prices, buying property when the opportunity arises. So a property's for sale, you could tag those properties along the corridors, identify those. If they do come up for sale, buy them then. You're not inconveniencing a future buyer of that property who then spends a lot of money making it work for their needs, or a homeowner, for example, that lives with the knowledge that in some point in the future their home or part of their property may be needed for front-runner expansion. So I think we would, as staff, we're going to continue to look at revenue sources, funding sources for those type of things. We'll talk about more of that as the 2020 budget comes along. But these plans help us focus on what those priorities are. How can we position that? The better we can do some of our front end work, the better information we can have to our funding partners that can look at this and say, okay, now they have a very good idea. They have a plan for going forward. What a reasonable time frame would be, what our priorities would be. Can we double track everything right now? No, we've got some very significant constraints of freeway piers and issues that are very hard to relocate. But what would be our priorities? Where can we make those incremental improvements to get the biggest bang for our dollar and make the biggest reliability improvements now, and with an eye always towards that future long-range plan? So that's why we've brought this to you, and that's how we've framed it, and how we'd like to have our discussions going forward.
Other questions from either
very much for the information.
Yeah, no, this has been great, and I agree, Steve. As you know, staff continues to look forward. I think more knowledge is going to help us make better long-term decisions, and certainly not to miss strategic timing of opportunities. And but we've appreciated this long-term look, and as we work with our communities to try to implement this, I think it's going to be an important part of the growth of the Wasatch Front as we go forward. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment as well. I think that the real value of all of this as well is to be able to get this information out. Obviously, our communities are actively engaged in giving feedback and prioritizing, but I think that there's also this ability to, like, we need to continue obviously with that communication, as well as working with the legislature and other stakeholders to understand kind of the broader perspectives. And so I appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate you guys coming here today. This was, I think, very, very helpful.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, both Sean and Ted. Our next, why don't we just take a 5-minute break or so, and we'll be back about quarter after to have our discussion on item B.
Oh, me? All right.
Okay. We welcome everyone back and from our break, and our next discussion item up next. And I just would say, as a precursor to this, first of all, thanks to our executive team for coming up with some proposed performance targets. And the board's going to have ongoing discussions, and this will help us understand certainly our executive team's perspective in this, and we want this to be a collaborative effort that become good ways for us to measure how we as an organization are progressing and fulfilling the service that we are tasked to do. And so let me turn it over to Steve, and then I'll let you introduce your team's efforts.
Great. Thank you, Chair. We did, you've asked us to come back with some proposed 2019 agency objectives, and we've looked at, as we talked about dashboards and how we put together the information we present to you. We've looked, I think, today, and you'll see, we've looked beyond the traditional dashboard type parameters, measurements, key performance indicators. We'll still have those, but we've looked at some of the key things that are really challenges for us and within the organization, more maybe a little bit more from a strategic lens, and probably not super long-term strategic, but today the things that are coming up. So you'll see in the service area, doing a better job at data-driven decision making and communicating that better to talk about these services, and that's the service choices effort that's going on. Making sure we're maximizing our resources to provide that access to opportunity. So what are we doing with service to help with that? Our strategic funding, we've talked about just now, future of Frontrunner, a tremendous amount of needs outpacing the revenues available, making sure we have enough funding for our state of good repair and our continued operations of what we have, let alone looking for those opportunities as we go forward for expansion of service. Future workforce, I think we've talked with each of you somewhat offline about the challenges we face, especially now in a hot economy, trying to obtain and retain our employees. What we have to offer here at UTA, making sure that prospective employees know about that. And then how do we, engage those employees throughout the life of their career here at UTA? And then community relations. How are we taking this information about what we're doing and communicate that out to the public, the customers, not just the people who ride, but all the people that help contribute and pay for the operation at UTA. So the team's going to go through their slides. I think we're starting with operations. Eddie, kick that off.
So from the operations side, our number one goal, or the first goal, is to meet or exceed all Chief Operating Officer key performance indicators. And so on the next slide, I will show you a picture of our dashboard that shows you all the things that we measure. As you've had the opportunity to get out to the business units, you've seen all the measurements on the wall. And so we have a COO dashboard, as we refer to it, that rolls everything up so we can kind of look at a snapshot from, across the group. And then this particular dashboard has the ability to drill down so we can see even more in-depth data. The second goal that we have is successfully implement new service. Obviously, this is something that's high on our radar. We have a substantial amount of new service coming in 2019. We have the Salt Lake City service that'll start in August. We have new service in Weber County. We have some new service in Tooele County. And then, we have the South Salt Lake Microtransit Project. We won't be directly operating that, but it's obviously on our radar and making sure that we're watching out for that. Number 3 is meet the 2019 operating budget. And I know that sounds like a relatively generic goal, but everything that we do has a budget impact. Everything's driven by miles and hours. And so as operations planners and RGMs and managers, they're looking at ways to improve the service. They have to understand the levers of the budget, and they have to understand how their decisions affect the budget overall. So it's something that we always have to be paying attention to in everyday business. Number 4 is develop a 5-year capital and state of good repair plan. with associated funding strategies. This has really been a huge project. In the past, we kind of went year to year, and we'd look at the projects for the year and look at how much money we had and put that together. What this will allow us to do is kind of look out long-term over a 5-year period. And so where we're at today, as we're going through, we're identifying all the needs. Of course, we'll have to look at what can be executed in 2019, what work can be done, and then we'll prioritize those needs against the available funding, and then ultimately come up with a 5-year plan. But I think this is something that's really going to help us in the long term, as we have to manage these projects and make sure that we're building things when we need to build them, and we're maintaining our system in a state of good repair. And then the last one up there is implement initiatives to support a strong organizational culture focused on employee development and retention. This is a big one. We know that employees are our most valuable resource. So as we look at, service expansion, things like that, this is kind of a shared goal with Kim and I. Obviously, from a people office perspective, she's into the recruiting, but we also have to do the things that we have to do to make sure that we're retaining those employees and making sure that people are trained and ready to go to provide those services. A couple other things that we'll be looking at in this particular area is, extra board operator working conditions. You've heard it as you've been out, you talk to folks. Being on the extra board is a tough job, and we have a team together right now that's looking at ideas that could improve those working conditions, but obviously there's going to have some budget impact on that. So that is something that, as we look through things, we'll have to find out, what it's going to cost, how we afford it, and those types of things. But that's some of our focus for 2019.
Can I ask, and it might be in your thing, but as that team analyzes some of that aspect, will they also factor in sort of the cost of high turnover? I mean, there's sort of this trade-off, and
there is,
and sometimes that cost can be more than whatever the incremental difference is.
That is absolutely on our radar. There's an obvious cost to turnover with extra training costs and things of that nature, and so yeah, that'll be a big part of the analysis. And my next slide, it shows kind of a snapshot of our COO scorecard. What the actual one is in an Excel format, and it allows me to drill down in each one of these categories. But if you look up there, it starts off with expense, looking at the budget. This is through February, so it includes January and February numbers. We're about 1% to the good. Platform hours and hubble miles, we were a little over budget in those particular areas, so we were red. Those areas, a lot of times those are driven by specials and bus bridges and things like that may not have been included in the budget. That's something that happens from time to time, but I expect that these numbers will level out in the coming months.
What's hubble miles?
Hubble miles is the actual miles that the bus drives. So there's a hubometer on the hubs, right? And it actually tells them, so when they fill it up with fuel at night, they register that number, and it gives us the total numbers that the bus drives. And so just to kind of put that into perspective, when the operational planners are taking the service plan and operationalize it, that's what they really bring it down to, is the number of miles and hours that we'll run in a given year. And then cost per hour, we're a little bit over in cost per hour for through February. That's really driven by the January numbers, as Bob reported. There was a lot of accruals that came in January that made January a relatively expensive month, but we fully expect that to level out in the coming months.
Does weather affect any of those hours, or?
Well, it could, if something was delayed or something of that nature, or if there were, problems, what caused a bus bridge, if we had switch problems or something like that. So yeah, some of those could be affected. Cost per mile, we're doing well. So usually cost per mile and cost per hour kind of go hand in hand because, it works out. But obviously, as Bob's reported, we've had some level of fuel savings so far this year, which is a good thing. And so that keeps down the total cost per mile cost. And subsidy per rider, we're doing well there. On-time performance, we're doing well. Year-to-date average boardings were up about 1.4%. That's mainly driven by the UVX at Timpanogos and Frontrunner ridership. And then the next category is service quality. This is bus miles per voice of the customer road calls. So Trustee Millington, this is something we talked about extensively last Friday in our trip to Ogden. And so basically what this looks like is the number of miles that a bus runs before a breakdown that interrupts a customer. And so we do a lot of things to be able to make sure that we think about our road calls from two different categories. It's not on this list, but we also look at just the total number of miles that a bus runs before we have a breakdown, but then we also measure from a customer's perspective. So what kind of unique things can we do to make sure we don't interrupt the customer experience? And then we have our rail miles per service interruption. This is measured a little bit differently. This is any time that there's a 10-minute delay, right? So if they're not at a stop, if it's more than 10 minutes, then it's documented on this. So this measures the miles between those 10-minute delays. And then finally, bus avoidable accidents. Our goal for that is 1. We're currently at 1.4, so we're about 4% in the red. It's kind of a unique thing. We have 2 business units that are in the green and 2 business units that are in the red on this one. And so we just look for ways to constantly, figure out ways to avoid these accidents and make sure we're being safe in everything we do. Any questions on the goals I presented or the dashboard?
No, that was very helpful. I mean, it's Habbo miles. I have a new thing to throw out at Trivial Pursuits or something. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Well, we'll head on to the Chief Financial Officer. Here's some of the goals that my team's put together for this year. And these are basically ones that you'll be seeing throughout the year. So, for instance, the fair strategy and policy. We'll be working with the board to give you some background on fair policy, talk about some of the considerations that need to be brought into play when you think about a fair policy and then actually establishing a fair policy. We also will look at some joint agency inventory contracts. The issue we're trying to resolve here is it can take up to 18 months to get a rail part in commuter rail. So we're working with San Diego and Portland transit agencies to come up with a joint agreement to help to attain a supplier who can have those more readily on hand so that we don't have to maintain a safety stock and don't have to hold those high cost parts and can get those parts much more quickly. So we'll be coming to you, I think, next month with the bus one. We had been negotiating on the rail parts with a vendor. Didn't turn out in a favorable way for us with our evaluation, so we're going to the second bidder there. And hopefully we'll be able to come up with a solution for that. You've already know about the TOD system analyst tool that has been used, and you made some decisions today that impact the next one, which is Paul's next job is to start working on the RFP for the new TOD sites, and hopefully have that put together and get that issued so we can actually select the developers. I think that timetable's to have that done sometime in May. Paul's also busy working on TOD sites, the current ones we have, and adding a couple of development phases, breaking ground. As you know, we've got some activity in the Sandy one as well as the South Jordan one with the second office building going up there. So continue to work on developing the ones that are active right now. And then we'll also be looking at updating the budget process for 2020. With the change in governance, we're looking at, what's the process? How do we move through this? How do we incorporate the advisory board? How do we make sure the board is in line for key decision points? And then we've talked about the budget amendments for the year and what's that process going to look like. And so we're working on some diagrams that we hopefully will be able to bring forward fairly soon on what that will look like. These aren't the only goals that we have for the year, but these are the ones that I think interface you the most. As far as monitoring and measuring, same thing. We have some that are easy to quantify, others that are, just did you do it or not? Did you get the CAFR done on time? And, did you meet all the expectations the board would have for getting that done? So we've got here are three. The fairest one is ticket vending machine uptime. We really don't have that quantified yet. We're still gathering the data, but we've set initially a 95% greater uptime. This is for the customers, making sure that when they sometimes are in a hurry to get their ticket, that the TVM they go to works, and they can get their ticket and get on front runner or tracks quickly. So we're still gathering data. The supply chain parts availability, this is a key measure in making sure the operations can have buses ready on time. Every day, meet their turnout. And the mechanics who are working on the buses or the trains at night, the parts are there. So this is a national standard, 95% or greater. Right now we're at 95%. And this is one of those trade-offs. You could say, well, we want a higher percentage, but that means you have to have a greater inventory and you've got cash tied up in inventory. And we're trying to balance that. So you don't want to buy parts that you may never need. So this is one of those interesting ones where finance and operations are trying to find a good balance.
Can I ask a question on parts availability and how it factors into that 95%? I think the other day I was out in my garage and I looked on a shelf and looked at some stuff and remembered that it was from a project like 15 years ago. And I don't even need it anymore. And obviously I had invested some money into it at some point and just had to throw it away. Your 95% ratio, are all those parts applicable to stuff we currently have in operations? Do we have any inadequacies there that?
Yeah, we go through a process every year to look at the vehicles that are going to be taken out of service in, say, 2 or 3 years. And we change our formulas so that we stock fewer and fewer parts for those vehicles because we don't want to end up with excess parts when we don't have vehicles. Now, if we do have that situation, we look at how can we sell those, get some value. So again, it's one of those balancing acts of trying to have the parts you need to keep the operating group going, yet being fiscally responsible in how we do that.
Yeah. I mean, as I've heard some of the value of those inventories, it's a lot of cash. I think it's the right thing to do to have them on hand or have access to it somehow within a short period of time. So I applaud that work. That's a lot of money to tie up sometimes.
It is. And so some of the things we've done to increase this percentage is we looked at the low value inventory items and said, let's just keep more of those. Why would we want to have a bus out of service because we didn't have a $5 part? And so that's one of the things we've done. We've looked at working with the operations to do predictive analysis of when will you need parts. We'll do campaigns, for instance, where we know we're going to change out certain. So we work with operations. If you can tell us when that's going to start, we'll get those parts in. Because the way the parts replacement system works is it looks at what your experience is and then ties that to ordering. Well, if you don't have any experience, we don't have the part. So if we can look ahead with operations, and there's a group who meets on a regular basis to look at these sort of things, we can hit that higher percentage and make sure that operations, the maintenance group, can do what they need to do. Now, associated with that, or closely related, is it's okay to have 95% parts availability, but if it means a part isn't there and you've got 40 vehicles down, well, Eddie can't meet his turnout every day. So one of the other measures that we put in here are vehicles that are out of service waiting for parts. And so we've set the standard of 20 buses where we're allowed to have a certain number of extra buses. And so we're working within that margin to make sure that we don't press Eddie on using all those extra buses. And then same thing with the tracks cars and the commuter rail cars. And where we're sitting at right now is we have 16 buses that are out for parts, waiting for parts. 7 of those are due to accidents. We've got 6 track cars that are waiting for parts. 3 of those are due to accidents. And we've got 5 commuter rail cars that are waiting for parts. None of those are due to accidents. So we try to use these 2 measures to make sure we're working well for operations.
Bob, I had a question. When you say you have these totals of less than 20 buses, less than 5, and then you listed obviously the current numbers that are out of service, is there a timeline associated to out of service in that would be acceptable and then suddenly it becomes unacceptably long? How does that play into that?
Yeah, I don't know that we look at it that way. It's out of service. How can we quickly get it done? And sometimes it depends upon the suppliers. And so we have a person in our office whose job is to call the supplier if a part is getting urgent that we need it, and if need be, every day. When are we going to get this part? We need this part. And squeaky wheel sometimes doesn't get the part.
Yes, I'm next, yes. So just as a review, I'm in the people office. There are 5 departments: our talent acquisition team, our HR services and labor relations group, our culture and talent development, our total rewards group, and our records management group. You won't see a records management goal outlined here. Not that that's not critical and important, but I tried to bring the things that rolled up into more strategic areas for us here. We do have goals in that area, though. Most of those goals, the goals that we've set for 2019 are a continued focus from our 3-year plan, that we put together last year. Really, all of it supports attracting and retaining a talented workforce. We are going into this year with some major initiatives. The first one being the need to successfully negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement that supports our ability to provide service, attract and retain our employees. And in addition to that, we have to focus on actually hiring and training our new employees to support the service that's going out on the street. We do have our bus ops and bus maintenance training departments that report into my area, and we work closely with the rail training departments as well. We have a focus on developing our leadership, our current leaders as well as emerging leaders. We know how critical that is to engagement efforts and for employee satisfaction. And so we've got some focus there. Also a focus on a culture that promotes employee engagement, makes people that helps people enjoy their job and get involved in their jobs in ways that make them satisfied here at work. And then we definitely want to better understand our overall employee health and wellness needs so that we can provide an improved quality of life for them, productivity, and also cost management as we try to maintain our good total rewards package for them. Of course, many of these goals are shared across the departments within my area, and also, as Eddie mentioned earlier, we have shared objectives with different units, business units, and other offices. So we, as you know, I believe, we are a fairly new office where we've all been put together in 2017. Our 2018 objective was to really better understand our people-related data, and we've spent a lot of 2018 refining that data. So 2019 is really a baseline development year for us. And so we've tried to identify key milestones, which is in a data focus column, but that's really our key milestones, and then where we're looking to create a performance metric. And the first one in our collective bargaining agreement negotiation, again, I've mentioned we need to support employee attraction and retention. Eddie mentioned the operator working conditions task team. That is a joint labor management task team that we are kicking off in the next month. And much of that work will likely feed some of the things that go on at the bargaining table. Of course, our performance metrics for our bargaining, we will come back to this group in a different form to have those set for us. Our hiring and training, again, we're spending quite a bit of time on recruiting and hiring events, trying to really key into to find the right type of employee that will be successful as a bus operator and, of course, as a mechanic as well. I mean, our efforts are on other positions as well, but our main one is our bus operator. And we are really looking at refining our training graduation rate for bus operators. We are currently reevaluating what the training needs are. We see people fall out mostly for not being able to pass their CDL. And so we're looking at, and we also see people have a hard time transitioning, especially into the Salt Lake area where there's a high number of routes that they have to learn in a very short amount of time. So we're looking in partnership with the Salt Lake Business Unit on how to refine and maybe add training days or whatnot to improve that training graduate rate. We're also looking at our successful offer rate, meaning how many offers do we make that actually result in someone coming to work? And again, trying to identify where people are falling out in there so that we can refine our hiring focus. We are looking at implementing, as I mentioned before, engagement is critical to retention, and so we have two engagement objectives here. The first being our leadership development, as I mentioned before. We have started work in 2018 on just doing more of a current state assessment of our leadership bench, understanding how much talent we have that's ready to move into leadership roles, and then where are some of the gaps that we might have with our current leadership. Just we've had a lot of change over the last 3 to 5 years, a lot of growth, and are there skill sets or trainings that are needed for our current staff? And we are partnering. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
And maybe it sounds like you might touch on it, and I don't even know what the percentage is, but is there a way to measure, like you have, where managers are in the spectrum of retirement, such that if you have like 40% of your managers coming up within a 5-year retirement window, that's a concern. Not so much because you don't have people underneath that could move into that position, but it's a big wave to have switch over all at one time, and so you might proactively want to be training some folks so that. And I don't know if we've made an assessment of that. I mean, it's not unique to UTA.
Right.
If anything, it's probably indicative of people that have been very loyal to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But other large organizations I've been affiliated with, they kind of keep their eyes down, but yet you have, all of a sudden you need managers.
Right. We have a couple of things we're doing to create, pretty much 2019 would be our data gathering and assessment to develop a full-fledged succession plan for 2020. That's one of our milestones that we would be measuring. But really, our talent assessments across the business units in particular is our first piece, and we have a shared goal with Eddie's staff to do those in each of our business units. We'll probably spend some time looking at our top leadership tier and where people might be getting ready to leave. We're working with Bob, and he's got some ideas on what he wants to do in his area. And so we do have it on our radar, but I expect a full-fledged succession plan to be rolled out in 2020. We are rolling out and have rolled out this year already our Leadership Pathways 1, which is really about emerging leaders, so folks who are not currently in a leadership role, but getting them prepared for that, whether that be a formal or informal leadership role. And then we revamped our essentials for managers and supervisors, our current managers and supervisors, to help with them, just making sure they have the skills that they need to be able to either advance or do their current role. But we would have a better feel for what you're talking about. I think sometime during this year, we'll have a better feel. I know that sometime during this year, we'll have a better feel for that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
One of the metrics that we did identify, although I think we can add something about, our retirement risk or turnover risk in the managers, grouping or the leadership grouping is also we will be looking at the leadership behaviors that we measure on our current engagement survey, really pull those out and see how we're doing in those areas. We likely won't set a target to improve a certain percentage, just because you don't expect to see statistically significant improvements in a survey tool like that, but we'll be watching those leadership behaviors for improvement over time. That leads us into the next goal, which is just our general overall engagement survey results. We are currently rolling those survey results out tomorrow in the Connects. You'll see those, but we did have a really an increase in employee engagement in our score overall, even in a year over year from last year, and even in what I would consider a more challenging year for folks, with the leadership changes and whatnot. So we've seen some good trend there, and we'll be working on identifying our top priority areas for action planning through the rest of this year and doing a pulse check survey on those items towards the fall. So we'll see that there. And then our last one that we've set is really our health and wellness goal, and that's to better continue rollout of our new clinic and our wellness programs to better understand and establish our like kind of an employee health metric, a benchmark that we can create a high level roll up. How healthy are we here at UTA, and what initiatives and wellness focuses do we need to roll out for our employees to continue, again, to help them with their quality of life, the productivity, but also to help us all manage those health care risks and healthcare costs, both for the employer and the employee, as we continue to provide a nice benefits package for them. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Nicole.
There we go. So, communications and marketing team. We assist in maintaining the fundamental relationships between the community and UTA, and our team's very excited about these goals and hope that they give you all confidence that we have the ability to promote and communicate the work of the agency. I like to say we write the lyrics to the melody of the agency because we really rely on everything else. We are a service provider to all our other teams. So looking at our goals, here we have make UTA more relatable, and this really is shown as our people-focused metric. Like, how are we identifying with our community and our employees and making sure that there's a true connection there. And you've seen our new campaign rollout, and that really reflects that kind of personable relationship between us and the people we serve. If you look at number 2, we're looking at better customer communication, and both of those are internal and external. We pulled these out because the internal focus is something that has been a priority for the agency over the last year, and we've really been working with with Kim's group and team to identify how we can better communicate to the 2,600 ambassadors we have here at UTA, and then our current, just improve our communication with the public as a whole. And then our placing the customers at the core of everything we do. Pretty broad, but our team really liked this idea of when we're making decisions and when we're sitting at the table and how we move forward, our customer being the focus of making those decisions. And it really requires us knowing who our customers or potential customers can be, and then also what their needs are. So it's really prioritizing an understanding of that. And finally, meet the transit needs of our current and future generations. We're a transit agency. How do we do that in our service planning metric and model? So, we set these goals as a way to ensure accountability to the agency. The department worked together on a half-day retreat to develop the goals and initiatives. And as you can see here, we've listed what the goal is, our data sources, and performance metrics. Some of our data sources exist, and some of them will be baselines that we're creating for 2019 and moving forward. And as Kim mentioned, when you're looking at these kind of surveys and focus groups, you're looking at an increase in improvement versus a hard percentage or a quantitative improvement. So the baseline is driven from some of our current surveys and customer feedback. For examples, we have the engagement, UTA engagement survey that we'll be looking at, a specific question on there to engage how we identify with our writers. We have a benchmark survey, which will be coming back to you in the next month or so, giving you an update of where we are for 2018. So you'll see the baseline, and we'll be working at specific scores on there to increase so that we know that we're meeting our targets for communication and relatability. And then you'll see some service goal, some joint goals, as I said, that we have a customer at the core, and then our meet the transit needs of the current and future departments. So when we developed these goals, the foundation is in a strategic plan. So as you'll see soon, our 5-year mobility plan, we have our communications framework, which is a strategic plan. We have branding style and customer service relation plans, and all of those give us kind of the guidelines on how to implement some of the tactics that we'll be talking about. While these are all high-level goals rolled up from the individual goals of the functions, just to give you some idea of what our team is working on, some initiatives, they really hopefully hope that they measure the impact we're doing with communications. So for instance, PR and marketing is proactively promoting people-focused tactics and measuring the media analytics. So we'll be looking at impressions, messaging sentiment, web analytics, all of those things to see if we're moving in the right direction. Planning is looking to increase their engagement with stakeholders. That reflects right back onto the meeting the transit needs. And one of the things they'll be doing is launching the stakeholder engagement survey, and then really looking at a question of, do we know what's important to our stakeholders? Is it economic development? Is it affordable housing? Is it frequency? Things like that. Customer service is working, again, this is kind of a cross-functional goal, but looking at our top complaints that are by policy. So Cindy will be looking at, so we have policies that our customers keep calling about. How does that relate to the policy? And then working as a cross-functional team with operations to say, how can we help communicate this better with our customers, or really understand the policy and how it's affecting our business? Customer experience is implementing the wayfinding project, and this is something near and dear to my heart, really looking at better access and ease of use of our system. So it's just intuitive when you get on there. And this is really focused on that understanding who our current and future customers are and what their needs are to be able to access the system and use it and make sure we're the transportation mode of choice. And finally, our innovative mobility team is really finishing and implementing their strategic plan. They have lots of pilots this year and doing some research, but how does all of this align with the agency's goals and service models in the future? So they'll be developing those. So that's just a brief idea of what we're working on, the tactics and how they roll up to the higher goals. But it's my hope that you all see how these relate to what we're trying to communicate to our customers and potential customers in the future.
I would, and I think these will probably come under the initiatives and think about it. But I was kind of reminded this morning, I'm finally replacing my 65-year-old garage door that I only open on occasion, and it's wet and dangerous. Mm-hmm. And right before I got ready to write the check for the half down, I thought, well, I should check the Google reviews on the firm I chose. And, you know, looking at how other people experienced it sort of gave me the final confidence that what I assumed was right was good. And I don't know if there's a way to have customers. I've kind of become a transit tutor, you know, like I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and I was explaining to him how he could be successful in transit if I could. And I just think that sometimes our customers are our best teachers. And if there's a way, a forum for them to somehow say, here's what you do, you know, or download this. And I mean, we don't have to, I think we can strategically work it, but I think they can be our best salespeople, right? And so some way as we get through that, and you know, it falls definitely in some of these categories.
Yes, it does.
I just think there is this fear, like getting onto the bus or the train for the first time, you know, what happens if I get stuck somewhere, right? And the answer's either your in-laws or Lyft or Uber, right? And you call somebody and have them come pick you up, but you're not stranded, truly stranded anywhere. Anyway, I'd love to have more conversation as we get into them. I just think there's going to be some cool ways that your team's going to think through and that would effectively accomplish a lot of them.
So I'd love to comment on that. One of the basics of knowing is what people are actually saying about us out there. And so we're looking in the next month or two at a tool that will take all of our impressions and blogs and sentiment, everything that's out there, and let us know dynamically, like today, what people are saying. And then we'll also see an individual that maybe is the top, kind of talker about UTA and what routes, and actually have an opportunity to use them. So I think we're going to look at a tool that would help us implement something like that, where we know how our customers are communicating with each other and how they could be used to help some people out there learning the system and really work with us. So I think that's a great opportunity to take.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicole, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I think that I'm just going to relate an experience that I had. I was at the Davis Council of Governments meeting last week, and prior to me speaking, they had two women who actually developed a business model based on the fact that they go do things, if you can believe that. They go and they experience things. They take their kids to Hogle Zoo. They take their kids at these little random things. So it's very micro-local, right? And they were organic. And they basically started blogging and saying, here's where you should go. Here, don't do this, do this, all in different areas throughout the Northern Wasatch Front. One of the things that I thought was so valuable, and I went up to them afterwards and I said, I would love for you to be a UTA ambassador, if you will. So, hook up, get that engaged in with your followers and see if there's any way that we can connect. And I like kind of what I'm seeing here is that we really want to make sure that we're engaging and understanding what people are doing and what we can do to tweak things in order to do that. That's going to be the key thing. If there's a slight, like if you find that there is, some writers are saying, here's an issue that we find, and you say, Eddie, gosh, if we could do this, this could just be that little tiny tweak that could really value this moving forward. I really think that community engagement and understanding who we're identifying and talking to, are we talking to, potential writers? Are we talking to current writers? Are we, who are the stakeholders that are critical to this? Really identifying and drilling that down, I think, is really going to be effective for us, because then we can take our messaging and go, here's what we are seeing. Here's how we think we can move this needle forward, or here's what we can do to maybe really create an additional service perspective that can be valuable. So I really appreciate you and your team focusing on this. I find that communications in general is just such a critical component. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Just an idea. For young people to get the driver's license, they have to go through driver's training. Do we ever cooperate with the training that's given by, say, UDOT on driver's training to say, here's how you use transit, here's what you do, and we go to the young people in the schools and say to them, there's an alternative to driving an automobile. Are you aware that we have this kind of transit system around? Now, it would only work in the high schools around where we provide the service. But have we ever done anything like that?
We have two actual initiatives that do that. Earlier, I think you heard a little bit about Sheldon being number 2 on Operation Lifesaver. Our police officers actually go into high schools and talk about rail safety and using the system. So we have that system. But last year, as part of this, we really wanted to build our community relations piece. And so we have a person dedicated on my staff right now that is doing field trips, going to schools, and building that relationship between K through 12. And so Sam's never in the office because she's out there doing these presentations. And schools have changed from when we used to do this back in the 90s, but now we're really trying to develop a new system where we're building those future writers of today. So we have actually two kind of initiatives going right into there. And we do work with UTA in that Operation Lifesaver program.
Do we ever give high school kids, as they're going through driver's training, do we give them a pass that says, in order for you to get a driver's license,
I love this.
You have to ride on transit for some and write a report as a part of your, because they have to go drive a car.
I think we should talk to Matt about putting that in legislation.
Well,
but it's a good point.
I'm just wondering, maybe we don't need that in legislation. Maybe we just need to get a few schools that say, yeah, that'd be kind of fun to do, and give them a pass that's good for 2 weeks, and they have to go ride something. It's just crazy ideas, but if we're going to cultivate riders, maybe those young people that are maybe not so interested in learning to drive or driving or owning a vehicle, we teach them how to access our services.
I love that idea. Thank you.
Steve, so we have the service development group that is evolving. Are those goals falling under Eddie, or how do we get?
Well, they're scattered a little bit between all of them here. So I think what you've seen is nobody had a siloed goal. Everything relates to multiple areas within which we've really tried to encourage, because we don't need any barriers within the company. There's enough challenges, outside the company that we need to deal with. So, I'm very happy with the team, with what they've accomplished as far as working together. Alicia helped us. She came in and facilitated our discussions on these things, and we try to gel down to what you've seen today. What do we think strategically important that we ought to be sharing with you and measuring? So we appreciate you thinking about that, and we hope at a future meeting get some feedback from you, and we continue to refine these in 2019 and use some of them and evolve some of them as we move into 2020.
Well, thanks to you and to the rest of the chiefs. We appreciate their efforts. I think this will be very helpful in discussions. We look forward to collaborating with them.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. That brings us down to our other business. And note that our meeting for April the 3rd has been canceled, and so our next meeting would be at 9 o'clock on April the 10th. But we have a special moment. There just happens to be somebody who we have a great deal of respect for, has a birthday this week, and his name is Steve Meyer. And the Motivicity thing keeps coming up and says, somebody in your team has a birthday coming up, and we're excited to celebrate it. So, unfortunately, I'm not the guy to start the song out, so I'm going to turn the mic off. But we'd like to sing a happy birthday to Steve. So if somebody who's a great singer will sing louder than me, that would be great. So on the count of 3, we'll sing happy birthday. 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Steve. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, and I'm glad that's going to be preserved forever on YouTube. So.
I predict it goes viral.
Well, I don't know what the rest of you are going to do for cake, but that's just about right for me. So, thanks.
Well, happy birthday to you, and we are sure grateful that you're at least celebrating this one with us this year. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment, and then we'll have some cake afterwards and invite others to join us.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned.